sharing my screen then.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Thank you for coming to Gender Stereotypes session. Ashrita ma'am is going to take over right now. Thank you, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashrita Mahajan. I'm a counseling psychologist with the Department of Mental Health and Behavioral Sciences at Fortis. I hope you're all having a good day so far. I'm here to talk about gender sensitivity and discuss gender stereotypes, the impact that they have. So, basically, the context of mental health, how gender stereotypes play out, and what are some things we can be doing to be more aware of the stereotypes that we possess and how we can break out of some of these stereotypes. So please feel free to ask any questions towards the end, and I would encourage you all to actively participate. There are a few bits here and there where I'd like you all to chip in with your experiences. I think if we can all share what we have experienced, it'll be a good learning experience for all of us. Um, just generally want to start out by defining what stereotypes are and what assumptions we make about certain genders. So, would anybody like to chip in with what are some stereotypes that they've experienced or witnessed around themselves?
Girls for the kitchen, mostly that.
Yes, yeah, that's definitely one of the most common ones that we see, that all the kitchen work is for girls, and all we'll
The
always see the
household
moms
chores,
doing it and
actually.
things like that.
The
Yeah,
household
yes,
chores, the
absolutely.
household chores, while
Yeah.
the
Hmm.
man goes out to work. So, if the
Hmm.
man is not working
Yeah.
and is at home, oh, he doesn't work. That is the question with the judgmental look given.
Yes, absolutely. That judgmental look. So yeah, so gender such stereotypes, we'll always be like, oh, all. So we have an over generalized belief. So we're like, oh, all women love shopping, all boys love sports, things like that. We'll say and we'll see around us. So stereotypes are essentially that. It's when we have an over generalized belief about a particular group or a class of people. And what stereotypes make us do is they make us ignore individual differences amongst ourselves, and it leads us to making false assumptions. So we try to put somebody in a box just because of a particular gender, and I think that's what we'll be talking about today and discussing that a bit more in detail. How sometimes these beliefs do not actually reflect reality. So these are some. I'm going to just play them out. These are some words that we hear, and then just reflect on what are the things that you associate them with, or if there's a particular gender that comes to your mind when I talk about these things. And if anybody wants to chip in with their thoughts, that would be really nice. So if I'm saying intelligent, strong, creative, what's coming to your mind?
Girls, obviously. Nah, I think both girls and guys.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah, that's true. I think, but yes, I understand that a lot of times we will think about a particular gender and we'll associate them with certain qualities or certain characteristics. So these were just a few, just like a jumble of sorts that I've put together just to kind of that we can map out our own experiences and what we want to associate what with. So, like for example, usually I think when I say doctor, what would come to somebody's mind if we're talking about in terms of profession? A lot of times whenever we say doctor, we will automatically assume it's male. So we will always say he, we couldn't get an appointment with him, things like that. And if we think about, let's say, teachers, we're always thinking that it'll be a female. So teacher will always be she. So certain things like that. Um, I want to talk about gender ideologies and gender roles a little bit. So, gender roles are essentially learned behaviors which condition us to perceive certain activities or certain tasks or certain responsibilities as belonging to a particular gender. So, some things are just meant for males to be doing, for males to be carrying out, and then females have certain gender roles that they need to stick to. So, that's what we mean. Just some questions to reflect on are that what is expected of us and what is allowed to us, what is valued in us. These are things we need to be talking about and discussing when we're talking about gender stereotypes and trying to be more sensitive towards these things. When we talk about gender stereotypes, it can be helpful to reflect on our own learnings, try to understand where the stereotypes that we may possess come from. So, a lot of times we do try, I think we all try hard to not adhere to certain stereotypes, but because they're so deeply embedded in us, it can be quite a process to get rid of those and unlearn some things. And I think one of the things that can be helpful in this whole process can be understanding where we have learned these from so that we can target those specific areas and generally gain a better understanding of ourselves. So, one of the first experiences that we have with individuals and in a social setting is our family. And our family plays, there are many research studies that show this actually, that our families and the parental behavior that we see, that plays a significant role in the stereotypes that we pick up and just the gender identity we form and things like that. So, one of the things is through observational learning. So the roles we see that our parents are playing out and the close ones are doing, what kind of responsibility did each parent have when we were growing up? Typically, in a typical setup, moms will be the main caregivers. They will be the one taking care of, as it was said, the household chores and things like that. And dads will be the ones who will be expected to be the breadwinners and the ones going out to work every day. And a lot of times that's where it ends for them. Other things the mom is expected to pick up. So that can be one of the ways where we pick up these stereotypes because we see them around us. Then exposure to gendered objects. So even within toys and clothes, I think a lot of times you'll see girls, so children who are girls, they're being gifted toys like a doll or something to play with, and boys will be given like sports cars and action figures to play with. If it's a girl's room, then parents will be like, "Oh, should we get it painted pink for you?" And for boys, it will be a blue room. So I personally had a pink room growing up, and I think it was both where my parents said that, "Oh, do you want a pink room?" And I was like, "Yeah, I want a pink room. That's what I want, and that's how it should be." I think that's what I thought as a child. So I got myself a pink room, and growing up, I deeply disliked the color and had to get it changed. Um, then certain rules and regulations. So a lot of times there will be different sets of rules in the family for boys and girls, even amongst siblings. I think we can see that difference where boys will have a different set of rules and regulations for them, and girls will be having a different set of rules and regulations, which will be some of the things that usually tend to become issues like. That we talk about and I've heard people talk about is the restriction around the movement, what time somebody is allowed to come home, what's the curfew time for somebody, so things like that. And so these would be the spoken rules, and then there's just some unspoken rules that, oh, like you've never seen and you've never heard a man cry in the family and things like that. So these are unsaid rules and regulations that sometimes come with the family setup, and we tend to absorb all of it when we are growing up. Then encouragement towards gendered activities. So a lot of times we will notice, and I think for some of us may have experienced that we're encouraged to cook, and the logic given to us is not that it's an essential skill that we should pick up and that it would be beneficial for all of us to know how to make a meal for ourselves, but that, oh, girls should know how to do it because tomorrow you have to go to somebody else's house, and how will you cook for them? So that also, so even basic activities sometimes become gendered activities. And I think that's something that we all need to reflect on and see what we need to unlearn from that. Then the next thing that we do, the next thing where certain stereotypes can stem from for us is school. So after family, I think school and our peers, our teachers, these are the places where we spend the most time. So naturally, a lot of our learning, even outside of academics, happens here. One of the ways in which schools can play a role in gender stereotypes is sports and extracurricular activities. So sometimes girls, let's say, or women may not have as much access to sporty activities and things like that. And naturally, the selection is that, oh, if it's a dance performance or if it's something else, then let's get all the girls together to perform something and things like that. Um, Teachers' attitudes and perceptions do play a major role in how we look at different genders and the gender roles that we develop and the identity that we develop within ourselves. So because we are interacting with our teachers so much, it is natural for us to pick up certain things from them. Choice of subjects can be one thing which can really make that distinction between different genders. I remember I went to an all girls school, and there was an all boys school right next to ours. And I had a few friends there, and I remember one of them when we have to pick our subjects in after 10th grade, one of them wanted to pick up humanity. So they wanted to do subjects like history and sociology and things like that. And they didn't have that option in their school. It didn't exist. That stream did not exist for them. So because they were largely considered more feminine subjects to pursue, and even in co-ed schools, you will see if there are subjects like that are more related to like engineering and things like that, then you will see that it's largely the boys who will opt for these subjects. So a lot of times that distinction can come in even in subjects. Are there any questions so far? Am I making sense? Anybody has any doubts, or anybody wants to share something, any thoughts that they've had so far?
No, they're all extremely relatable. In fact, I remember when my son was about 4 years, 3.5, 4 years old, he was crying, and one of his teachers said, "Oh, boys don't cry." So I had to tell her that, boss, you're not to teach that. My boy will cry
Yeah,
whenever he wishes to cry. So let's not like say that boys don't cry and only girls cry, sort of a thing. So it's still
yeah.
relevant in today's times, unfortunately.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm so glad to hear you step in that situation. And I'm so glad you spoke up, because that does tend to happen in schools. And I think if that idea gets reinforced at home, then we have a lot of unlearning to do when we grow up. So you caught it at the right time, I think.
I hope.
uh, all right, so I'll move on. The next thing I want to talk about is peers. Uh, so our friend circle defines what is normal for us. Normal can mean different things for different people, and what we see commonly happening around us, what everybody else tends to do, is what we define as normal for ourselves. So that can differ from friend group to friend group, the same way that it can differ from culture to culture and community to community. So if the peers around you are sticking to certain activities, and a certain gender is sticking to a certain activity, then you tend to think that that is normal to do, and anything outside of that is not okay to do, or that you will be the odd one out. And that can kind of build this pressure to fit in a lot of times, so we tend to stick to certain stereotypical behaviors, and eventually over the years sometimes we may even naturally try just absorb them and make them part of ourselves. uh, so certain games and activities as well come in when it comes to this situation. When it comes to identity formation, peers do play a big role in how we form our identities and the gender identities that we form. There are some studies which show that peers do provide a staging ground for all the socialization behaviors that we learn. So we socialize with them the most, and the behaviors that we see happening around us are the ones we try to mimic. So we do tend to pick up certain stereotypes sometimes. Generally, community at large, I think we're all familiar with this, plays quite a significant role when it comes to certain stereotypes and defining what certain gender roles are. So there are social norms, and then there are expectations. And if a man or a woman, they act differently from how their gender is expected to behave, then there is a disconnect that happens in the person's mind, in the evaluator's mind also, so in the mind of the other person who tends to be evaluating you. And this can feel uncomfortable to some people, so they continue to stick to the stereotypical behavior, and this can be quite disturbing for many as well. And because we see those certain activities as normal, so we've seen girls always take care, be the main caregivers and take care of the household and things like that. So those things are normal for us. If we see them prioritizing everybody else before themselves, we stop questioning it. We just think that's normal. That's how it's supposed to be. Sometimes concerns around safety can perpetuate these stereotypes. So things like girls not being able to step out after a certain point of time, and then that kind of turning into, oh, they always need somebody to be with them and things like that. We use gendered language. So this, I think, comes again, the point of professions come in, that a lot of times we use so he or she for certain professions only, and so we kind of make our language also very gendered. Media, I think we're all familiar with this. We've all had some time to think about this as well, and especially in the last 2 or so years that we've spent mostly being indoors, we've all consumed way more media than we would usually, and that has given us some time to reflect also on this, and may have also played a role in how we choose to behave in certain situations. So there's objectification of men and women, both on media, when it comes to different kinds of media. There are unrealistic expectations that can develop from that. We see men and women on screen behaving a certain way, and we tend to think that that's how it's supposed to be, and then we try to mimic that, even though we may not personally agree with it sometimes. There's that definition of attractiveness and popularity. So there are a few movies and few shows where the media tends to demean men in caring or domestic roles, and then they tend to make those who are more into action and try to hit other people, those things as popular and those things as normal things to do. And that is something that young people will watch and maybe absorb those things. So that is where media plays a big role in kind of defining what certain genders are supposed to do, what is okay for them to do, and in a certain way also telling them that this is how they should be doing it, this is what will make them popular, or this is what is going to make them seem attractive. Influence of role models. So there are so many influencers these days, and we make them our role models. We look up to them, and when we look up to somebody, we naturally tend to absorb the things that they are saying and try to be like them because we're looking up to them. So a lot of times, their thinking, their perception can rub off on us, and we can kind of inculcate those things within ourselves as well. Then depiction of traditional gender roles, media will portray that as well, where typically women are doing certain things and men are doing certain things, and that kind of leads to that idea being perpetuated in society as well, that this is how it's supposed to be. That movie also showed it, so that's how it must be. So these are some ways in which the media can play quite a huge role when it comes to gender stereotypes. The next thing I want to talk about is impact of gender stereotyping. But again, I want to take a quick pause before that and just check if there are any questions or any feedback, anything that's not working you'd like me to change the approach. Okay, I'm going to assume that as a yes and that everything's okay and continue. So let's talk a little bit about impact of gender stereotyping and what are the various areas of our life that gender stereotypes can have an effect on. Here, before I start, would anybody like to share maybe certain experiences or take a quick minute to reflect on the impact of stereotypes and then share?
So yeah, I would like to share something. So this is not related to me. It's related to one of my friends who, so she has a brother as well, an elder
Mm-hmm.
brother, and she lives in a joint family,
Okay.
and so she used to always complain as to why she was born a girl, because everything used to be, the guy doesn't have to do a single, though the guy is just 2 years elder to her. The guy doesn't even have to lift his glass and go to the kitchen, whereas she has to do all the work. So she used to be like, why me? Why, we are the same? Because she used to consider her elder brother just like her, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
why the difference and
Mm.
everything? So they're going to school, they're going to college. Every time she has to come back and do it. So when she told me, I was like so astonished, that because I never thought it still exists, but that's when I
Mm.
got to know that it actually carves your behavior, your outlook. You suddenly. So she was like, what did I do to become a girl? I said, no, being a girl is a very nice thing, but telling her that is not that, because she doesn't. So to the extent that she gets discriminated even in front of her grandmother prefers the brother to her, and would give the
Yeah.
hot dishes to the brother and then the stale ones to her, which is like, that's something you see in
Yeah.
movies, you don't expect it to see in reality. So
Yeah.
yeah, it does change you as a person. So just wanted to tell you that. So
Mm. Yeah.
it's very toxic at times,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Yes.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And thank you so much for sharing this. And like you said, that you wouldn't think that it still happens. And I think in the broader context, in a lot of ways, we seem to have progressed and moved forward. So when you actually get down to the small things, that's when you realize that that kind of thinking still exists. And we now need to focus on the smaller things, because yes, we have achieved, maybe we think that, oh, we've kind of achieved some sort of equality when it comes to bigger things. But it's these small things that play out in the family that can have quite a deep impact on somebody.
There's another person who's written, "Ma'am, since my class 6, 7, my mother taught me everything household to manage myself, cooking, washing, dusting, and all." So it's a guy who's written
Hmm.
this. And whenever I felt like
Hmm.
crying, I didn't feel bad, and my mom was also always with me. So that's great. Kudos to your
Yeah,
mom.
that's so wonderful. Absolutely, yeah. Kudos to her. That's such a nice thing to do, and that's so good to hear. Because I think that can really be helpful with emotional regulation and just developing our personality as a whole. So I'm so
Yeah.
glad to hear that. That makes me
Yeah.
very
So
happy.
instead of commenting that stereotype dialogue, I was helped out by her. That is true. That's what he said.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's very
That's so nice. Okay, all right. So I'm so glad to hear these stories, and thank you so much for sharing. I want to talk a little bit about the impact on self when it comes to these stereotypes. So, a few things or a few ways in which our self and our sense of being can be impacted is that we may develop low self-esteem. I think some of us have been there, and some of us have seen the people around us go through this. That a lot of times we might not personally meet the idea. We don't have the typical interests that people from our gender usually do. So, we don't fit into that gender role. And that can make us feel like we're not sufficient or we're not good enough, because that's the feedback we are likely to receive from society and a community, that, oh, you're not behaving like a boy, you're not behaving like a girl. And that can make us feel like we're no good, or that we're not doing the right thing, we are doing something wrong. And our self esteem can take a deep hit when it comes to such situations. Self stereotyping. So we start putting these rules and regulations in place for ourselves based on the feedback we've received and the things we see, where we tell ourselves, oh, we should or should not be doing this particular thing because girls don't do this or boys don't do that. And we start to stereotype ourselves and our own behavior. Self-fulfilling prophecy. This is essentially when we become something that we are told. So, we tend to fulfill those roles purely because we've been told that that's how it is. And we start then fulfilling those kind of gender roles, whether or not that personally resonates with us or not. Impact on future decisions and aspirations. I think this is one that concerns me the most when it comes to such situations, because a lot of times there are people who will hold back from their wants and their needs and make their future decisions based on their gender, because they try to hold back their aspirations and the dreams that they may have, because they feel that, oh, girls can't be doing this, or because they're told that just because you're a girl you cannot do this, or just because you're a boy you cannot be doing this. And that can really impact our sense of self. uh, Dissatisfaction and distress, which is quite common when we are having low self-esteem. We are constantly dissatisfied with ourselves. We're harsh with ourselves. We push ourselves to fit into a particular box, even though we may not personally agree with that kind of box, and that can make us feel quite distressed. The next thing that can be impacted is our relationships, and these can be any relationships. I'm not just talking about romantic relationships, but our relationships with our family, with our siblings, with our friends. All of them can be impacted due to certain gender stereotypes that can come into play in these relationships. This can create barriers in communication, so we may not feel. So in a lot of cases, what might happen is that, let's take the example of a romantic relationship. This is something that I have commonly observed, that the men will be hesitant to be more verbal and more affectionate and talk about their true feelings and how they might be feeling something. And because they're hesitant to do that, maybe a small thing which or a small conflict which could have been resolved through just a normal honest conversation, it kind of escalates into a really big issue because that came in the way of their communication. So a lot of times these can act as barriers. There can be a lack of understanding and uncertainty in interpreting other behaviors. So we may have a certain idea of a gender role that the other person is supposed to play in that relationship, and again, our role based on our gender in that relationship. And the other persons might not match with that. Then, if there's no communication, then there's a lot of understanding, a lack of understanding, miscommunication happening, and we're not able to interpret the other person's behavior accurately. There can be inequality in relationships. I think very commonly we can see this in partnered in romantic relationships where one partner has all the responsibility of maybe doing all the things, day-to-day things, things in the house, looking after the house, things like that, and then the other person is doing certain other stereotypical things, and there is some sort of inequality where one person is quite burdened with the responsibilities. So that can happen as well when it comes to stereotypes playing out in relationships, and that can lead to a lot of mismanagement, miscommunication. Impact on society as a whole, I think this is what we very commonly see around us. There's inequality and there's discrimination. People get denied access to certain resources or certain opportunities based on the gender that they belong to, or that they don't fit into the box of the gender that they belong to, and that's why they don't receive access to these things. So a particular gender is looked down upon sometimes. There's lack of diversity. I think this is especially true in the case of a lot of professions. I think where we see that, certain professions are very male dominated, certain are very predominantly female. So there's lack of diversity, and I think because it is like that, a lot of times it can hold back people from the other gender kind of trying to step in and getting their foot into the door. There's increased need for conformity. We're constantly trying to conform to the societal rules, and that may also sometimes happen at the cost of our own well-being, just because we want to be accepted and we want to fit in. There can be increased aggression and violence. And increased crime, especially against those who try to step out of these roles and step out of these boxes. They don't receive any support from society. They're looked down upon, and they do often become victims of crime and aggression and violence as well. So, we've discussed the impact of stereotypes. We started with defining what stereotypes are and sharing certain stereotypes that we've seen around us and experienced. And then we discussed what the impact of these stereotypes can be, where these stereotypes can stem from. So now that we've covered all of that, we've discovered the small issues, things we need to work on. So how can we break these stereotypes? What are some ways in which we can make ourselves more aware of the stereotypes that exist around us and take active steps to have these stereotypes minimally impact our lives adversely? So these are some slides that just have these sentences, and I want everybody to reflect on whether they're true or false. Oh, there seems to be a typo there. But whether they're true or false. So these are some common stereotypes that we see, which is that men are more possessive than women. Anybody has any thoughts on these?
I think women are more possessive.
Okay. And would you like to share why you think so? What led you to that belief?
Like, can't explain properly, but due to observation, little.
Hmm. Okay. All right. So you've observed around you that women tend to be more possessive. All right. I think that it can be either or none when it comes to such situations. I don't think that possessiveness is something that comes from a particular gender. There can be many factors at play, and that can be true for either a man or a woman. Does anybody have any other thoughts on this one? I'll move on to the next one then. This one is that girls like to go shopping more than boys. So girls are the ones who are always insisting on shopping, and they're the ones who enjoy it, and boys are not ones to do that. Anybody has any thoughts about this being true or false, or has an interesting story to share?
I think it is either, because my husband also loves to
Hmm.
shop a lot.
Yeah.
He's the one who loves to shop more than I do. So I think it is
Uh,
either.
yeah, that's true. Again, this is again either. Shopping has nothing to do with gender. I think it depends on the person whether they enjoy it or not. The next one is that women are better at looking after children.
This is the excuse the guys give so that they don't have to look after.
Yes, I have seen that happen around me as well. around me, definitely, that I think we've had this idea now go on for ages and ages, where like women are naturally, it comes to them naturally to be the caregivers, and they're so good with kids and things like that. So you're right. I think that works as an excuse as well for other people who may not want to take on that responsibility. That you're the woman, so you're supposed to be good at this, and you are naturally good at it. So go ahead, like do it. So again, this is something that depends on the person. It has nothing to do with gender. Caregivers can be both kinds. This one I think is one we've very commonly heard, and this was mentioned also initially, that boys don't cry. This is one that is quite commonly I've seen floating around. Anybody has any thoughts on this?
Ma'am, I disagree with this.
Okay. So would you like to add a little bit more about why you think or why you disagree?
Like everyone has their personal and like emotional freedom. So according to their wish, they can show their emotions.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. And like you said, that crying is an emotional expression. It has nothing to do with the gender of the person. So let's stop saying this to the boys around us and the males around us. Let's give them that space and create that space for them where they feel comfortable enough to cry and express their emotions. How about this one? Anybody has any personal experience with this or has seen people around, maybe family, loved ones, prove or disprove this?
Actually, our comic which we made for the gender
Mm.
stereotype, it has one of I
Yeah.
don't know if you saw that comic. So yeah, it was
Yes.
for girls driving. So yeah, because
Yeah.
that's the standard
Yeah. I
thing that
think
girls
that's
don't
very
know how to
common.
drive. Yeah, which is not
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. No. Yeah, definitely. I think I've seen some really good female drivers and I've seen some bad male drivers as well. I think that depends on so many other things than just the gender of the person. But that's the first thing that we will see even just come out of people's mouths when there's something, somebody makes a mistake on the road and they'll be like, oh, that guy, that must be a girl. So that's the kind of stereotype that usually we have around us. And I'd like to share like my personal experience with this, that I think I had heard this so much around me when I was learning how to drive, that it kind of stayed with me. And I was so scared to go out on the road and drive because I was scared that if I make a mistake, that is what I will get to hear. And I have heard it actually on numerous occasions, even though there was no mistake of mine, nothing. But sometimes small miscommunication, some errors will happen on the road, and the first thing people say is, "Oh, girls are no good at driving." And I think personally for me, that stayed with me so much. It took me a long time to become a confident driver because it kept playing in my head when it came to driving. So that's the kind of impact that these things that we hear around us can have on us. I thought I'd also share my personal experience since all of us were chipping in. So that was for me when it comes to
Thank
driving.
you, thank you.
Men and women all prefer the color blue over all other colors. Anybody has any thoughts? I think generally just the idea of colors being associated with genders is something that we all need to work on because it's just a color. We don't need to really assign genders to it. I'll move on to the next one. So that was the stereotypes. If anybody has any more they'd like to chip in before I talk a little bit about some other things we can be doing to step out of these stereotypes. Okay. So the first thing that we can do when it comes to such situations, and these are things which are more that we can do on a personal level. I understand there's a lot of change that we need to bring about at the societal level at large, and lot of awareness that we need to bring about in the community at large. But I think that we can all start with ourselves first, and then if all of us take one little step towards being more aware, then generally just at the larger level, I think we will be able to see a change. So one of the things we can do is be more empathetic, which essentially means that we imagine ourselves in the other person's shoes. So have open and honest conversations with people about these things. Try to look at things from their angle or their perspective when it comes to these stereotypes. And I think even when we are trying to educate somebody or trying to talk to somebody about certain stereotypes, let's try to be more empathetic, less judgmental if their ideas don't align with ours, and instead think about what we can do to make this a more interactive communication, wherein the other person can also chip in why they think a certain way, and that gives us some concrete areas to work upon with them, rather than just telling them that, hey, you're being so stereotypical, you're being stupid, and things like that. Be open to others' views and differences. I think that kind of tolerance is something that we all can make good use of. It's always a good idea to learn and to constantly evolve as a person. So be open for conversations, be okay with feedbacks and different points of views. Try to understand where the other person is coming from within your friend circles and within the different circles you move around. Try to create a culture where there can be open communication without judgment, so that we can all look at the different perspectives that everyone possesses, and then we can work upon some things we identify that we need to work upon. So the point is that make that effort to bring about the change wherever we need it. But the first thing we need to do is become more tolerant of other views and differences, so that we are able to then have that conversation about what change needs to happen. Gain some personal perspective. I think in our day-to-day lives, in our busy lives, we often forget to reflect on ourselves and our own behavior, our own thoughts. So take some time out every day, maybe 10 or 15 minutes towards the end of your day. This can be a good practice to do in general, not just for gender stereotypes, but just spend some time thinking about the day you've had, any learnings you've had, any areas of improvement that you've identified. So this gives us the chance to constantly work on our behaviors and our thought patterns, and unlearn or learn some things that might be needed. The next thing is that we can do is to question our assumptions. I think that we all try very hard to, when it comes to these gender stereotypes, I'm sure we're all trying very hard to break out of these stereotypes and not let these come in our way. But still, a lot of times we can make certain assumptions. So, what are some ways that we can look into that or work on that? The first being that refrain from generalizing. Do not generalize something based on the person's gender or any other factor, even in fact, when it comes to any situation. Do not assume that they will be doing something because they come from a certain family or certain gender and things like that. So do not generalize, do not take one quality of the person and make that an umbrella sort of label, and then try to look at the person in that from that lens only. Question your beliefs. I'm sure that all of us have had certain moments where I personally have had these moments where I've said something, and then a few minutes later, I've realized, why did I say that? Where is that coming from? Because ideally, I would want that I don't believe in that thing, or that I would think that I didn't think this way. But then, because there's so many things at play, like we discussed, our school, our friends, our family, that we do have certain ideas deeply embedded in us. So it's always good to reflect on our beliefs and our assumptions and where they might be coming from. What are some changes we can bring about to be more aware, to be more inclusive when it comes to such things? Watch your thoughts. Again, this brings me back to the point of reflection. It's a very good practice to be engaging in some reflection every day, just to understand our thought patterns and where our thought patterns might be stemming from. That can give us a good starting point for any change that we are wishing to make within ourselves. So just generally, we're almost coming towards the end of the presentation. Um the idea behind this was to break out of the stereotypes, and I think that if there are a few pointers that I'd want all of you to take away from today, is that don't let yourself be defined by these stereotypes. Constantly question yourself. If you're holding yourself back from doing something, why is it? Are any stereotypes coming into play in that situation? Can you do something about that? These are just some questions we can ask ourselves. Be open to exploring your own interests. Put everything aside, put all the factors aside. Just think about, okay, if I had free will and open ground, what would I want to do? What would I want to try my hand at? Focus on your own goals and priorities. A lot of times we we can kind of give into the idea of society and what they'd expect from us, those around us expect from us. And while I'm not saying to completely disregard these things or close your ears to any sort of opinions, it it can be a good idea to first focus on your own goals and your own priorities. Be clear about those things, be confident about those things, so that you can then take into consideration other people's opinions, but take into consideration, not let them define you or let them dictate the path that you choose. So these are a few things that I'd want that, and I'd hope that stay with you from today's session. Another thing I want to talk about quickly is boundaries. That when we are in the process of breaking out of these stereotypes and helping others do the same as well, it can be a good idea to practice some boundaries. While we all have a similar goal to grow and evolve as a person, everybody has their own pace and everybody is on their own journey. So to respect that and to maintain some boundaries, which can be beneficial not just for the other person but for us as well. So, boundaries, when I say boundaries, what I mean is that it's a personal space that we build, and it comprises of our beliefs, our attitudes, and our experiences, our learning. So, somebody's idea of boundaries may differ from yours, and it can be helpful to keep that in mind. So, just generally, when we are in the process of breaking out of these stereotypes, a good way can be to a good way of recognizing these boundaries and when we might be stepping over the line is to look at this. Just some general signs of discomfort can be things like taking a step back, lack of eye contact, changing the subject. So this gives us the idea that the person is not comfortable discussing this, or the person is not comfortable with this. And some things that can indicate comfort are if the person is leaning in, they're giving extensive answers, the eye contact is consistent, the conversational flow is pretty easy. So these are some ways we know that the conversation that we are engaging in, they indicate comfort. So this can be a good idea to keep in mind when we're trying to raise more awareness and talk about these things, because these can be difficult conversations for some of us. So it's a good idea to respect each other's boundaries. Um, I think that's all from my end, and all I wanted to share about gender stereotypes and developing sensitivity towards these things. Are there any questions? I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for that wonderful session. We have a Google form, guys. You can anonymously ask your questions if you are hesitant to put it in chat or to unmute yourself. Srila, are there any responses in the form? No, not yet. Okay. Okay, this is the form. You can ask if you want, or you can just unmute yourself and ask as well, and you can put it in the chat as well if you have any queries.